Hi, everyone. Welcome to our latest edition of SuperNova Commencements. I'm your host, Kashi Sehgal, and as usual, we have a great show for you today. So, we are talking about lots of cool things. Our guest has done all kinds of cool things. One of her roles was in supply chain, and we haven't covered that yet in our Your Career Powered by Data segment. So I thought we would spend some time chatting about supply chain, so logistics and supply chain. You know that our partner Steppingblocks has 100 million people worth of data, and they can analyze trends within industries, and they can help you figure out what to spend your time on depending on your goals. So they're really cool. Check them out. Okay, so a few stats about logistics and supply chain and a career in that. The most common educational background is a degree in business management. There are about 570,000 people working in this industry in the United States. The average age of the industry is 39, and it's 42% female. So more male dominated, and 2% veteran. Top skills that you see within the industry: logistics, makes sense, transportation management, and supply chain management. And always I get asked this, so skills that make the most: supply chain optimization, so figuring out how to make it work as well as it possibly can, as efficiently and as cost effectively as possible. Reverse logistics and imports. And a lot of people come from these schools: Penn State, Ohio State, University of Arkansas. Okay, so there you go. There's your background on logistics and supply chain. It's a cool industry. There's lots going on these days, and it's a very ripe area for innovation. And we're going to talk about that today and lots of other things with our guest. So let me bring her on the screen. Hi, Duriya Farooqui. How are you?
Hey, everyone. It's great to be here.
So everyone, Duriya has had many different roles, but just to highlight a few, she is the past president of Supply Chain Innovation. See what we did there? So supply chain innovation at Georgia Pacific, which is a great company here in Atlanta. And she was the past COO for the city of Atlanta. And she's done lots of other things. So Duriya, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kashi. It's great to be here. And it's always great to talk to students. So I appreciate you doing this series.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to do it. So Duriya, please start us off by telling us where you're from. Where did you go to high school? Where did you go to college? What did you major in?
So I grew up in Karachi, Pakistan, on the other side of the globe. I did my O-levels and A-levels, which were British exams for high school, and then came to the US, went to college in Massachusetts in a small liberal arts school, Hampshire College. It was part of the 5-college consortium with Amherst, Smith, Mount Holyoke, UMass, which I took full advantage of. I majored in economics and math, took classes across those 5 schools, and then ended up right after that at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, where I got a graduate degree in public administration and international development. And the plan was really to be, in that world, go work at the UN. I did have some stints at the World Bank and the Center for Global Development. But when I came to Atlanta, my career took a pretty different turn. And we can talk more about that.
Yeah, please tell us. How did you get from Harvard, no big deal, Harvard, to where you are today?
So it's interesting because I came to Atlanta really because of my husband's career, and he was a consultant in technology and had a big client here. This was 15 years ago, over 15 years ago. And when I came to Atlanta, I realized I'm not in Washington, D.C. I'm not in New York, where most of the big, global international NGOs and organizations were that really drive development thinking around the world. So I explored options in Atlanta. I talked to the Carter Center, CARE, which are two very important organizations headquartered here, and ended up talking to a fellow alum from the Kennedy School who said, why don't you come work in city government? And I said, look, I know really nothing about local politics and how cities operate. I know it's funny I said that at that time. This was 2007. And he said, look, you have a master's in public administration from the Kennedy School. I'm pretty sure you'll figure it out. So I joined the city under Mayor Shirley Franklin's administration. She was in her second term. And I joined the finance department and then progressed fairly quickly, moved to the mayor's office within months, led a lot of the, today that role would be the chief data officer. So I stood up as a director of performance management, metrics, and all of the tracking across departments, how we're doing in terms of crime rates, as well as response times for all sorts of different things. So it gave me a very strong and fast tutorial, if you will, in how cities operate. And that was really my first role in city government. I thought I would be there maybe for a couple of years, but I ended up staying for almost 6.5+ years. And my last role was Chief Operating Officer before I left at the end of 2013.
For Mayor Reed, right?
Correct. So I joined in Mayor Shirley Franklin's administration, had the opportunity to lead the transition when Mayor Reed was elected and coming into office in 2010, and got a chance to meet him actually after he was elected for the first time. And had an opportunity to stay on and lead a lot of interesting, impactful initiatives, which I'm proud of, particularly because of the way they've shaped the city. So I was Deputy COO for 2 years in 2010 and 11, and then Chief Operating Officer for 12 and 13, before I left to do some work in the private sector and join Bain & Company.
Can you tell us a little bit about your work in the private sector?
Absolutely. So I joined Bain & Company it was a surprise because I was a pro bono client for them as COO. And, they helped support some of the things that the city was doing at the time, also with the backing and sponsorship of some business leaders in Atlanta through the Atlanta Committee for Progress. And, one of the partners in the Atlanta office asked if I would be interested in pursuing a career in consulting. And I said, I didn't know that was an option. So yes, I would be interested. And interviewed with 8 to 9 partners across different offices, and got a chance to spend time at Bain, really serving private sector clients across a range of different, disciplines, growth strategy, customer segmentation and pricing, some M&A, and also one of my favorite engagements was a project for a I can't name who, but it was an educational organization in Atlanta, a well-known charter school entity which was thinking about growth. I loved that intersection of public and private partnerships, which has kind of been a theme in my career, because when I left Bain, it was to join and be the executive director of the Atlanta Committee for Progress. And the ACP is a coalition of about 30 CEOs of companies that have a HQ or a big presence in Atlanta. So think about CEOs of Coca-Cola, Delta, Home Depot, UPS, Invesco, Georgia Pacific, to name a few, plus college and university presidents, Georgia Tech, Spelman, Morehouse, Emory, and others that combined were a coalition that worked with the mayor of Atlanta to really drive public-private partnerships forward that are going to be important for the city's future. So lots of initiatives that you see get investment from businesses and leaders in Atlanta have come through the ACP, and that's been a forum for backing kind of the collective horsepower of our business community, our incredible colleges and universities and the assets they have, working in concert with the mayor. So that was a stint with the Atlanta Committee for Progress. I agreed to lead the private sector for 2.5 years to lead them through a mayoral transition, because Mayor Reed was ending his second term in office, and Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms was coming in. And we wanted to make sure that she had the right support from this group, number one, and two, that the legacy of partnership between mayors and business leaders really continued into another mayor's term. So that was a rewarding time. And once I had finished my commitment of 2.5 years, I came back to the private sector and took on a role at Georgia Pacific as the president of supply chain innovation, to stand up another effort that had partnership at its center. And we can talk more about this, but supply chain really became, it wasn't sexy when I took it on. And it really was something that, and supply chain enthusiasts will say that, no, that's not really true. But, it's always had a great following, always been a great discipline to pursue, and great career paths. But it became well known even outside those spheres, because guess what? When we couldn't get masks in a pandemic, you're still looking at, so many people at the federal level, at the local level, and big pharmaceutical companies trying to solve the supply chain challenges of getting vaccines to those who need it in the order of who's at risk. Those are all supply chain challenges, right? And they hit home in a very, very global and immediate and personal way over the last year as we've lived through this pandemic. So I think supply chain has become much more important in the consciousness of the average consumer, and the understanding that if you can't get your toilet paper, or you can't, buy a mask when you need it, or get PPE to hospitals where healthcare workers are working round the clock, what's the problem? The problem is you don't have a supply chain that is geared up and ready to deal with that throughput and sudden spike in demand. So I think that is going to become a defining competitive advantage for businesses, and those careers will continue to matter. But, I'm seeing this, frankly, a conversation even at the board level, right? So I serve on the board of the New York Stock Exchange, its parent company, Intercontinental Exchange, as well as the board of Intercontinental Hotels, which is headquartered in UK but has a big presence in Atlanta. So you're seeing that conversation float through, the highest levels of visibility. And it's a great time to be in that career, consider it, and the skills that you need for it have also evolved, right? Technology has become hugely important in that space. And I think there's a new generation of students and professionals that will really make their mark there.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let's go all the way back to the beginning. I want to start with your time as COO at the city. And you spent time there before being COO. What surprised you the most about working for city, local government? And what would you say is one of the hardest things you had to tackle while with this city?
Yeah, so let me start with the first question, and, Mayor Reed is going to remember this, but what surprised me the most was, I grew up in a poor country, and I grew up in Pakistan and was there till I was 18, right? And part of the reason why I had a passion for policy and public impact and public service was because I felt that one of the biggest constraints to challenges, whether it was in education, inequality, poverty, housing, was resources, right? So I'm going from a country that has high poverty rates, is, on some measures, one of the poorest in the world, to the richest nation, right, on the planet. And when I came to Atlanta and had a chance to serve in city government, I think what shocked me and surprised me was there were so many challenges in urban cities, including Atlanta, that were akin to the challenges that exist in developing economies. And this was the case despite the fact that we're in the most resource rich nation on earth, right? And at the time, the graduation rate of Atlanta public schools was, I think, around 55%. It was lower maybe at that time because it was dealing with accreditation challenges. And to me, that was unacceptable, right? The fact that a quarter of kids in Atlanta have lived in or have experience in poverty was astounding to me, right? And those were both examples of things which I was very affected by, and in some ways more so because I was shocked that this was something we allowed to happen in a place that is not, we've got Ivy League institutions in this country. We've got incredibly strong and rich educational institutions in Atlanta itself. And we kind of, haven't gotten that right all the way to high school. So, those are two examples of things that I found really challenging. And what was hard was that, there weren't easy levers, right, for them. And, mayors would remind me that the mayor doesn't run Atlanta public schools, right? So, all of my outrage could only sort of be channeled to a certain degree. And, so I think, one, that's what surprised me the most, that the problems that I didn't expect to exist here did in really deep ways. And I struggled with why there wasn't more outrage and a stronger will to address those challenges. In terms of tackling what was hard to tackle, gosh, that list is long.
I'm sure.
I'll name like three things. One, we did pension reform early days, and a lot of students may not get why this mattered, but let me put it this way. The city was on a path to insolvency. It wouldn't have had the resources to function if it didn't tackle something that was very important in its financial commitments, right? Which is, what are the pensions of employees, and can you afford to pay them out when they retire? So restructuring that was very important to free up resources that would make critical investments in the city possible. I mean, you've seen an incredible boom in the last 10 years in Atlanta. Atlanta is in some ways an unrecognizable place if you moved here 15 years ago like I did, right? And it's in great ways. We've got incredible development that's happened, a tech scene that's growing. A lot of those investments have happened because this was a great place to live, right? And for that, you need to provide essential city services. And to have the room to do that, you have to make sure you have the resources to do it. So pension reform was very hard. It was analytically hard. It needed some, math skills that made even my head hurt. And at the same time, you had to convince police officers and firefighters that, we are focused on a secure retirement for them versus the promise that can be fulfilled. So pension reform was challenging coming out of the recession. I think the second thing I would say that was hard and took a lot of focus was, when I was deputy COO and through the time I was COO, we made a decision that we were going to cut response times for 911 calls by a minute. Why did that matter? Because after 5 minutes, if you have a heart attack, the chance of survival drops dramatically. But if you can get EMS there within 5 minutes, the chance to live is very, very different. And, classic example of a matter of life and death. And 1 minute may
Something
seem
you don't
like
even think about.
Yeah, no, right. And 1 minute may seem like it's easy, but it took 2 years of relentless focus. And this is an example of problems where multiple skills, right, come into play. You had to make sure you were hiring enough 911 operators. 2, you had to make sure you had enough first responders on the ground, staffed to respond. You had to reduce the time that someone is on the phone before a response is triggered. You had to train people differently and get enough 911 operators in seats. And then eventually you had to shorten the time it takes to get from dispatch to a response. And that took 2 years of relentless focus to get there, but we got there. So, some problems are easier and have shorter time horizons, and others take a lot of discipline, drive, and pulling at different levers to make happen. And then the last one I would say was negotiating the lease and the agreement for the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So I was the chief negotiator on the city side. And I will say, usually the only woman in the room. We were talking about sports and a sports franchise, and selling that, structuring that agreement. Obviously, Mayor Reed, put a stake in the ground and said, "This is something we're going to support and make happen." And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what is the right structure and how do we get that pushed forward. And at the time, Atlanta United didn't exist. So all the Atlanta United fans out there, we knew that soccer was going to come, and that had not been inked. And the potential of really a massive cultural shift in the city and the ability to host national and global events like the Super Bowl and Final Four were all within our reach. But it was a hard thing to get through and to make that case, 9 to 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So those are, I think, 3 very different examples of what was hard and at the same time rewarding, because when you get something difficult across the finish line, it feels good.
Mm-hmm. It feels good when you get the first one done and then you're like, okay, let's do it again. It's motivating, right? You see Absolutely. That you can have success and then you go and you do it again. And maybe you don't succeed, but oftentimes you will, the more you try at it. So, and I love the 911 example because that's something that you just don't think about. It's not necessarily, like you put it, a sexy problem. It's not the stadium, but it's such an impact on people's everyday lives, and you just don't think about that stuff. So I would imagine it took a lot of asking questions and really understanding the root of the problem and talking to different people before you even realized where the solution lay, So
that is so right, Kashi. And I will say that, having natural curiosity helps. So, I would say to students, nurture that curiosity, right? The asking why and the, okay, but then why, right, is important. And asking the right question is something that becomes more important as you progress in your career, not less. Because when you get to the C-suite, whether you're the COO or a CEO or in a boardroom, right, you're actually not running the day-to-day, but figuring out what is the linchpin that makes everything work, and are those issues, in good standing, or if there is a problem, what are sort of the right questions to ask? It leads you down a path of inquiry, which optimizes your time. It makes sure you're focused on the right things, because, you could go down a rabbit hole, right? If you're asking kind of the wrong question about why something is either broken or there are certain challenges or why certain problems exist. Asking why is important, and then checking yourself and saying, did the information I got in the first question support that I should continue down this path, or is this not kind of the right vector of inquiry, right? So, I mean, with 911, it was asking questions that led me to understand that there are, more than 6 things which matter, and they have to come together in concert, and you have to have a solution for each and then knit them together. And that's partly why it took so long, right? Because the life cycle of fixing certain things is hard. And, going through the recruiting process and training to be a 911 operator is several months. It's not a week or two, right? So you have to fix the entire funnel. And a lot of things that you might come across as applies to supply chain too. It's a funnel, right? And 1, do you understand the funnel? 2, do you understand where there are bottlenecks in the funnel? And then are you doing the right things to tackle them and really create change?
Yeah. So I think part of this speaks to partnership. And I want to talk about your time at the Atlanta Committee for Progress, ACP. You mentioned that it's a partnership that is the city working together with business, and in this case, big business. So why is that important? And how do you bring people together to work as partners, or entities together to work as partners who may sometimes have different goals or maybe different short-term goals?
Yeah, so I love the way you frame this up, Kashi, because let me just make a broad statement. I think in the next 10 to 20 years, the most groundbreaking solutions in the public sector space are going to come from or through partnerships with the private sector. And you're seeing this with startups, right? I mean, startups are stepping into the space using technology to solve problems, which traditionally has been left to government, right? But technology is such a huge lever. There are great examples in Atlanta, right? I mean, Gooder, for example, which is focused on hunger. And I love the mission of Gooder. And it's basically a public good that a private sector for-profit company is addressing and solving. So 1, I think there's a huge trend where there's opportunity to innovate faster outside of government in spaces where you can have a massive impact on society, right? You're seeing this in healthcare too, with telemedicine and a lot of other things. So that's one comment. But when I think about the ACP, the same thing applies to business. Atlanta has the 3rd highest concentration of Fortune 500 companies headquartered in a city in this country, right? So we bat above our weight, if you will, in terms of metro size and region for the number of companies, not only that are HQ'd here, but that were born and raised here, right? So, Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines, I mean, many of these companies are kind of made in Atlanta, not just in Atlanta, but made in Atlanta. So there was a understanding that these are companies and businesses that have massive employee bases, enormous horsepower in terms of resources and infrastructure, and interest in doing good, right, and giving back to the city. So why did it matter to collaborate? Because if you've got 30 CEOs sitting around a table, they want to make a change and create impact in education, they could do it many different ways. But if you are trying to move the same needle collectively, the collective power of that is much more than the sum of its parts, right? Yeah. So if you can get multiple companies in Atlanta aligned behind a single strategy for the city or for any issue, whether it's inequality, education, health in our city, imagine the impact of that versus a very diluted, everyone kind of doing their, pet community project. So that's one reason why it mattered. The second reason it mattered is because, at the end of the day, the resourcing and the reach of government is going to be limited. And why? Because they operate off of a tax base, right? Unlike private businesses, you can't decide to raise the price of that whenever you feel like it, right? If you want to get reelected. So it's important to collaborate because there is a lot that businesses bring to the table that governments don't have. And there is a lot that mayors bring to the table that a business leader cannot effectuate change on, right? Yeah. So the Bell Line, which many people listening, it's not something that may occur to them as a public-private partnership, but it is. It was made possible by the city offering up infrastructure and what it could offer up, and business leaders like Cox Enterprises and so many others making that first big seed investment to bring it to life. So that is it's led to a huge impact in the city's development, the culture, our ability to bike, and really come together as a community. And it is a great example of a public-private partnership that we get to enjoy and don't really think about.
Yeah, it's definitely a great example and a great space and a win for all involved. Okay, so let's talk about supply chain. You mentioned this earlier. Right now, we're struggling with getting vaccines into the arms of everybody in the United States and even globally. Mm-hmm. Have you always had an interest in supply chain? How did this kind of come about? And my other question about this is about Georgia Pacific as a company. They're a paper company and very Southern. I've known about them for many years growing up in Atlanta. What was it like being a woman in a very male-centric organization and also not looking like everybody else? You're from Pakistan. So, I'm sure it was very also white. What was it like working there?
So I think let me start with supply chain. I think that, the reason why I took on that role was actually grounded in collaboration more than supply chain. Georgia Pacific was trying to stand up this effort where companies would come to collaborate and address problems in supply chain by contributing solutions and working together. Why did that matter, right? In supply chain, it mattered because if you think about it, the chain of custody is so fragmented. Let's take the example of paper, right? When you follow tree to paper, how many different handoffs take place for that journey, and how many different stakeholders are involved, and how many different companies are involved, frankly. And it became clear that multiple things were difficult to solve by one single company on their own, right? You needed collaboration. Number one, we're focused on carbon, right? And if you are thinking about tracing the carbon footprint, you want to think about, did this come from a sustainable forest and a forest that basically has green practices? How was it transported? How was it manufactured? And traceability and visibility kind of go hand in hand. So if you don't have visibility into your supplier's supplier or your supplier's supplier's supplier, then that ability to sort of trace and track that breaks down. So traceability and visibility matters both in terms of understanding where value was added, but also tracking it, right? Because we've all gotten used to getting that tracking number from UPS and Amazon and knowing exactly where our package is and when it's going to get to us. But think about the fact that for 80% of the journey of that product, people cannot do that, right? So it's we as the consumer are seeing that last mile, but you don't really, you're not really able to see further back. So that was one reason collaboration was important. And the second reason is that technology actually exists to help make that happen, whether it's AI or drones or machine learning or sensors that help you track the temperature and where something is. Mm-hmm. A lot and automation, right? Robotics, basically making the manufacturing process, the delivery, and the loading, unloading, etc., much more efficient. Those solutions exist, but they have not been applied to use cases as strongly as they should in supply chain. So it was less about inventing new things, but more about let's take companies that are applying these solutions elsewhere to within supply chain. And there was a massive opportunity to do that. It was not possible to do without collaboration. So the idea was to set up a Center for Supply Chain Innovation that brought 40, by the time I left, we had over 40 members. Think about AWS, SAP, the big enterprise giants, companies like Delta, UPS, Genuine Parts, and then about a dozen startups that were really at the cutting edge. And bringing them together to create teams to solve problems was a powerful, powerful way to tackle some of those challenges. So that's kind of what was important and at stake. A big part of our strategy was to have a space. And when the pandemic hit, bringing people together in person to work on these problems became something that, was scope that you couldn't pursue. So, a pivot was needed. And that's part of the reason why a lot of that effort went in-house. And, I basically left to focus much more on my boards. So that's kind of like my first answer to the question. Huge space for application of technology to solve challenges in very legacy, traditional, infrastructure-oriented companies. So that's ripe, and you're seeing companies that are tackling that, like Rody and Convoy and many others. In terms of what it's like to be a woman in a man's world, let's just say that Georgia Pacific was not my first foray into that. When I ran the ACP as the executive director and supported 40 executives and leaders, I'm not sure anybody else with my demographics was in that room either. I sit on multiple boards, and that has not really been the case. So I think that number one, I view one of my superpowers as and I realized this late in life, but as an immigrant, right, I came to the US expecting the playing fields to not be level. So, I operated under the assumption that I have to be at least 30% better than the person I'm competing with to win. And, I didn't shrink away from that. I was happy to take that challenge and say, yes, I can do this, right? So I think the expectation that I'm going to get access or the playing field is going to be level, or I'm going to have rights of a citizen weren't part of my psychology when I came to the US. And I think that is a big difference between the structural racism we see for our Black community, right? Where, no, you were born here, you were raised here, you're an equal citizen. We expect there not to be bias and discrimination, but, you get a rude shock on every step along the way. So I think that experience is very different, even though I think that solidarity is very important. So let me just put a pin in that. So I think that for me, that's one thing that has helped me not be surprised when I guess I'm the only person in the room that's either a woman or a person of color or Muslim or, wasn't born here or whatever the case might be. And I've sort of moved through the world with the expectation that that is often going to be the case and not let it faze me. I think I didn't realize at the time that it was valuable in walking into a room and not letting the room shake me. So that I think is something that is important, particularly for women, to learn early and to not shy away from sitting upright at the table. And the thing that helps is mastery. Learn your craft, right? Because then you speak from a place of confidence. If you're someone that is best positioned to add value on a certain topic or speak to a certain topic, you're not competing with anyone else in the room. You are, but you're not. So I think one thing that has helped is it's a blessing and a curse. But when I was a child, my dad said to me, there is no room in this world for mediocrity. And you can do and be whoever you want to be, but whatever you decide to do, you have to be the best at it. So that's a blessing and a curse, because that has made me, put pretty difficult standards on my own self and be very competitive and, try to do whatever I do it well. And that's kind of been the story of how different opportunities have come to me. It's been serendipity. If I had planned my career, I would have done a pretty poor job, because I would have definitely crafted something that was under ambitious, because I couldn't have imagined or expected I would be where I am right now. But if you do well, if you represent what you know well, and you try and do the right things and do right by people, it gets noticed, and you get opportunities that come your way that were never part of your plan. Mm-hmm. And then it's on you to just seize them.
Absolutely. Really quickly, we have student questions coming in, but I want to just touch on these opportunities that have come your way through your board service. So there's nonprofit board service, and then there's corporate boards that you can sit on. And you sit on, you mentioned them earlier, the Intercontinental Exchange, or ICE, and ICE owns the New York Stock Exchange, and ICE is actually in Atlanta. Many people don't know this, but the New York Stock Exchange is owned by an Atlanta company.
Yes.
You sit on both boards. And you also mentioned that you sit on the board for IHG, Intercontinental Hotel Group. So
yes.
What is it like to be on a corporate board, and how do you position yourself to get selected for something like that? Like, does that come after success in business? How can students think about navigating themselves towards something like that?
Yeah, so I think number one, let me start with the latter question, right? Throughout your entire career, if you are someone that wants to be in a leadership role, or whether it's being a CEO or serving on a corporate board, it's important to practice leadership early. Leadership can manifest itself in many different ways. You can be a leader in a class. You can be a leader as an activist, as an organizer. You can be a leader as an entrepreneur, where essentially you are leading the charge, whatever that charge may be. So I think getting comfortable with leadership early is something that translates pretty effectively longer term into getting leadership opportunities. I think nonprofit boards are part of that, right? So at a certain stage in your career, you may get the opportunity to serve on a nonprofit board. And if you do, you learn some valuable skills, right? One, how does a board operate? The most important thing that a board does is hold the CEO accountable, right? So you're not running the company, but you're holding the leadership of the company accountable to the goals they have set. So that's one. Two, you are representing external stakeholders, right? And other stakeholders that may be internal as well. So in the case of a public company, you are representing shareholders. And the idea is that you are representing the long-term success, viability, growth, and value of an organization. That would be the case on a nonprofit board as well, right? Because oftentimes there may be short-term decisions that benefit the organization 1 or 2 years, but they truncate the long-term trajectory of a company or an organization. So it's important to be able to represent that and understand what that strategic horizon thinking needs to be. So I think those skills and acquiring those skills matters, right? Learn what a P&L looks like. What does it mean to actually have to live within your budget or to grow your revenues? Because when you understand how an organization functions and what leadership decisions have to be made, that is when you can actually advise someone that is doing that, right? So I think oftentimes when people are early in their career journeys, and this often happens to women and people of color, that you kind of get encouraged to do support roles, right? Whether it is, marketing or HR. And don't get me wrong, there is tons of value in doing that. And there are people who have a passion for it. There are people who are gifted and talented. But more often than not, I think that people who can run a business, run a P&L, be in an operational role, raise your hand to do that. Because longer term, that's invaluable experience from the perspective of either someone running a company or how you might have a viewpoint that's valuable sitting on a board, right? So that and then the last thing I will say that one can do to position themselves is expertise, right? So, and this goes back to the point I made earlier about mastery, right? Know your space and crush that. Mm-hmm. So mastery matters today. They're generalist skills, and some people are just great leaders, and that the importance of that is never going to go away. But if you happen to be someone who can bring domain expertise, whether it's in technology, whether it's audit, you're an accountant and you spent a long time thinking about auditing and have experience in that space, cybersecurity, right? That's important. Are you someone who has been really successful in not just sort of thinking about, but doing something about D&I? Right, which is diversity and inclusion for students that may not be familiar. I think that those are that's domain expertise you can bring. And for people who are further along in their career, sometimes the board is looking for someone from a specific industry, mm-hmm. right? So, for example, I'm on the board of Intercontinental Hotels. You mentioned just recently, we added Richard Anderson to the board, who is the former CEO of Delta Airlines, right? Travel and hospitality, very well connected. You're talking about hotels, which depend on travel and recreational travel. And here's someone who has very successfully led an airline that went from bankruptcy to the most successful airline in the world, and another great Atlanta story. So I think that a lot of those things can matter along the journey. But if you can bring expertise, great leadership skills, and perspective, and have had exposure to, and ideally have run an operation or a business, those things matter.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And, especially remember what she said about boards looking for different things. Just because there's a board of a car company, they might be looking for somebody in marketing to help them think through what, how they need to position their story, or accounting or something else. So your skill set can matter, even if you think it doesn't apply specifically to an industry. A board is about so much more than just the industry in which the company is in. So I think those are all great points. Okay, we have lots of student questions, so let's get to at least a few of those. Samuel wants to know, what is the most innovative idea that you saw in supply chain, or you've seen in your supply chain?
Wow. I think the most innovative idea that I have seen in supply chain is probably the most difficult to execute. But the most innovative idea I've seen in supply chain is to use blockchain to track the carbon footprint. And much like is the case, I mean, if you're familiar with cryptocurrency, right, it took a long time to get to a place where, okay, Bitcoin was a viable blockchain enabled way to track currency value, right? And the question is, when are we going to get there with tracking a carbon footprint for the evolution from raw material to product on the shelf and then into the hands of the consumer? I mean, in a world sometime in the future, I'd love to know what my specific carbon footprint is, what Kashi's carbon footprint is, and that gives us leverage and power as consumers to effectuate change individually and collectively, and for companies to be held accountable, right, to making choices that are minimizing the resource drain, not just on specific resources, but on our planet collectively.
Absolutely. Let's take one on career advice. So Sonam is curious, what is your opinion on work from home versus work in the office? Many of the positions, she says, many of the positions I'm applying for say remote, but will employers change their minds when everyone is vaccinated?
So I think number one, a much higher degree of remote is here to stay. That's just my opinion. And I say that because previously many employers thought that remote is not workable, and they've actually seen it is workable. So I think employers are, one, more comfortable that it can actually work because everyone had to get up to speed to actually making remote work. So I think some of that fear of the unknown has gotten handled and has been eliminated. And two, employers are using that in the fight for talent, right? No longer are they only able to look at talent within their geography or with people willing to move and relocate themselves and their families in many instances. So they're using that as a competitive lever. So I would not underestimate whether, some jobs, if any jobs are going to stay remote. I think some will. Now, depending on what the job is, once you get the offer, I think you can have an honest conversation and say, I want to really understand the expectations. Some employers may say, I don't know. Some may say, we are going to go back to the office for some portion of the population, but I don't think this job is going to require that. And three, you can also shape the conversation by saying you're willing to travel, but you're not sure that you'd be willing to move, and that's okay too. And lastly, I would say you can also kick that decision down the road because many companies are not sure about what the future of work will look like for them. And as long as you have some assurance that you're not expected to move in the next year or 2 years, that may change the way you think about it. So I wouldn't underestimate employers continuing to use the option to work remotely in a way that wasn't there before. Will some jobs go back into the office space? Absolutely. But will that happen for every single job? I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great advice. And don't be afraid to have that conversation with whoever you're speaking to about the job, because it's good to get clear. You don't have to just take what
the job first.
Yeah. Yes. Sunny would like to know, how do I know that I'm starting out on the right path for me?
Wow, I think that that's kind of an existential question that never leaves you, right? So I'm, in my 40s, and I still ask myself that, and it's good to sort of have a gut check. I think that that number one, it's helpful to get a view of yourself from people that are close to you and believe in you, right? So I often ask people that I respect and value their opinion, but they've seen me enough up close. What do you see me doing, or what do you think that I should consider that I haven't? So one, I think it's helpful to sort of have a sounding board, your own board of advisors, if you will, that that you talk things through with, right? So that's helpful. Two, no one knows what you're capable of, and sometimes you don't know, but no one knows better than you do what you're capable of, right? If you believe in something, grit, perseverance, and just sheer execution trumps most things every day of the week. So, having conviction is important. So if you are sort of questioning where you are you on the right path or not? My question to you would be, what would it take for you to feel like, yes, this is the path I'm going to follow, right? And I think the perspective that's important in that is, think about a play in a football game, right? You're going to pick a play, but you'll have many other plays in life, right? And most things in life, most decisions in life are reversible. There are very few which are not, but most decisions in life are reversible. And for the most part, if something is not working, you can always make a different choice. But when you choose something, commit to it, because it will show in how well you do, how good you feel, the validation and feedback you get, and also the impact you have.
Great advice. I mean, as you're talking, I can think through experiences in my life where all of that applies. So that's great advice. All right, last one. You touched on your personal board of advisors. Kaylin wants to know, do you have mentors? And did you formally ask them to be mentors, or did it just happen?
I don't think I've ever formally asked someone to be a mentor. And different things work for different people. But I mean, let me step back and first say, it's important to know the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, first of all, right? A mentor is someone who is, you reach out to them, you say, can I get coffee with you and get some advice? And they say, sure. They give you some advice. They spend the time on thinking about what's the right answer for you, or, how to support your thinking. But then when they leave the meeting, that's kind of their investment in you is gated, right? A sponsor is someone who is willing to expend some capital of their own to help you be successful, right? And let me give you an example by what I mean. If it's in an organization, maybe it's your boss. You've applied for a more senior position within the company. Your boss could have one of two, general approaches in supporting you. Your boss may say, oh, that's great, you've applied, I'm supportive, and here's how you should think about it, and, happy to be a reference, right? There are instances where that person might instead pick up the phone, call their peer in the company and say, I know you're thinking about a lot of candidates, but she has incredible potential. I really think she would do a great job, and give her a shot. That person now has expended some capital, right? Mm-hmm. And vouching for you in a way. But if you actually don't succeed, they have taken a risk potentially in supporting you for that role in a significant way. That's someone who's a sponsor. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to know the difference. Who are mentors that are going to give you advice that will be supportive and do so in a way when asked? And who are people that kind of almost have stock in your career, right? Have decided for whatever set of reasons, either because you've been very loyal and have brought a lot of value, or they believe in you, or you've made them feel like they are truly people that guide your career path, and you've helped them feel invested. So I think that's important to have, and both are important to have. I think sponsorship is generally a natural evolution. You can make someone be a sponsor. They have to choose that they are going to invest in you, but you can nudge them by saying, would you call this person and vouch for me? It would mean a lot to me. And help them think about the difference, because not everyone does, and how much difference it can make. Because oftentimes, if you're a woman or a person of color and you have a white male boss, right? They may not have had to do that for someone in the past. And I've always viewed it as a great sign when someone exhibits the conviction and the ambition and says, I want this, I can do this, and I am going to do my best, right? So I think that asking is important. So going back to your question, in terms of mentors, I've asked people at different stages in my life for advice, and some have given it to me consistently over time, and then I've not seen them in between. And then there are others which are more like friends that are my peers, and I ask them for advice or use them as a sounding board much more often. So I think that having mentors is important. You want to pick them for the right reasons. And sponsorship is something that I think is earned more than it is granted and asked for.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And sponsors come out of you building a relationship that's not based on anything, but really building an authentic relationship between you and whoever it is.
Yes.
And then that naturally evolves, or you, like you said, nudge it. But yeah, you can't just expect that someone's going to do something for you without putting in the time and energy.
Right. And I think it's important. Just, you may have the best mentors and sponsors, but at the end of the day, you have to want it, you have to put skin in the game, and you have to ask for it, right? I mean, an example is when I was interim COO, and the mayor was trying to decide whether he was going to do it. He had publicly committed to doing a search, and a good friend gave me this advice and said, you have to. I said, if I'm right for the job, I'm going to get it. Very Asian merit-based thinking. And she said, you have to tell him you want it. I said, it's obvious I want it. She said, So I went to the mayor and I said, I really want to be your COO. And if you choose me, I will make sure you never regret it. Yeah.
That worked.
But I mean, it says that you're putting extra skin in the game, right? I mean, that's a pretty bold statement to make. You're never going to regret it. But that means I'm going to work as hard, if not harder, to ensure that never comes to pass.
Yep.
But it's more than a job. So I think making your intentions and your conviction known can make a big difference in whether someone decides to be a mentor or a sponsor. Because fundamentally the difference is a sponsor is taking some risk as well. And you have to help them feel like you share that risk.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we're like overtime. We've had such a good time. So we're going to have to end things there today. Duriya, do you have any parting words for our students before we head out?
I think the one thing I will come back to is having conviction, and find a way to have conviction in what you're doing, and regardless of which direction you decide to run in, run hard, because it's true, that makes a difference in your chance of success. And the last thing I will say is one thing I've learned to appreciate later in life and have realized has mattered a lot along the way is relationships. Oftentimes we forget that whether it's in business, whether it's in your career journey, whether it's in your personal connections, that the lines between that and professional life become blurry over time. Relationships matter. And, always engage with people with the expectation that you never know how and where your paths may cross.
Wow, that's just such a great way to leave it today. I almost don't want to go into the business that I have to just remind everyone about, but I will. We are on the web at supernovacommence.com. Find us, #SuperNova Commencements. And we've got cool things for you. So sign up for our mailing list, internships and grant opportunities and all kinds of fun things. So check us out. Don't forget, we're back again next week. And next week, we've got Christy Benson, who is Director of Communications at the High Museum. So should be interesting. Students, have a great week and hope you are having a great semester. And remember, it's a blessing to be a blessing. So be kind as you go through your day today. And we will see you next week. Have a happy and safe week, everyone. Bye.